Hello and welcome to episode 26 of the Community Trail Running Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Lee. Thank you for joining me once again. So many podcasts out there, and I so appreciate you spending a little bit of your time with me. Today's podcast is the first of year 2. Thank you for kicking around for so long. I'm excited to keep going forward. And I'm excited for today's guest, who is Ben Mead. He hosts the Chasing Cutoffs podcast. It's a super fun podcast hosted out of Olympia, Washington. Ben chats with all kinds of runners fighting the struggle at the back of the pack, looking to finish, looking to chase those cutoffs. It's great. Can't wait to get to the interview, and we will get there just after a little bit of housekeeping. I've started a Discord channel. There's a link in the notes here to the podcast. Come on over, join the Discord, chat with us. We'll get going over there. I'm not quite sure what I'm doing there yet, but I'm excited to be able to interact with all of you in another way. And thank you to all of you who checked out last week's year in review piece and podcast. That was a lot of fun to put together. It was a little bit different. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to this next year. Before we get to today's show, I'm going to answer Andrew Giles' question from the Dear Abby Adam column. I kept it open for a while. Andrew had submitted his questions quite some time ago. I hope to get a few more questions submitted. It didn't happen, but I'm very grateful to Andrew for submitting his. I had 2 race directors respond to the question, so I'm very excited to share those responses. One is this week. It's Matthias Eichler of Rock Candy Running in Olympia, Washington. And next episode, I'll have Mike LaBelle of Coastline Endurance and Island Trail Series, his response. But today, Matthias wrote in response to Andrew, and Andrew's question was, Dear Adam, I'm a solid mid to back of the pack runner. Most prizing is geared to front of the pack, which I never am. What should races do to encourage folks like me, or should we just simply run for the joy of it? Matthias wrote back and said, short answer, should we run simply for the joy of it? Is there another way to run? His longer answer is his suggestions and what he's personally working on as race director and a podcaster is on race day to have raffles for all bib holders. That way prizes, especially valuable ones, can be easily distributed amongst the entire running population. He creates races where coming in first isn't the only focus. For example, they had 2 endurance events where people run short loops. There will be someone who runs the most loop, but everyone who races has their own race and a different goal, so they get to celebrate that. And as the podcast host, he likes to highlight stories of the everyday runner, not just pro athletes, and telling stories of adventure runs and fastest known times. Thank you, Matthias, for your answer. Thank you, Andrew, for your question. Look out next week for Mike's response, but this week is about Ben and Chasing Cutoffs. Today's guest is the host of Chasing Cutoffs, Ben Mead. Ben calls Olympia, Washington home. Yes, he's another podcaster from our neighbors to the south here in BC, and I've been wanting to get him on for a while because his podcast is such a treat to listen to. If you need to take a moment to add it to your playlist, do it right now. Ben, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here, Adam.
I'm so excited you're here as well. I'm going to lob a nice softball in. That's the way we like to start. Tell us about yourself, your running, and how that led to Chasing Cutoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been running for maybe 15 years or so and was not an athlete as a child. I was all heart and no talent. So, but I found running later in life and fell in love with it, and then ultimately discovered trail running after that. But that's just where the discoveries began, because the other thing I discovered was that I was incredibly slow compared to anyone that I was running with. And so I was really having a hard time finding people to even like run with because I was so slow. So I've gone through a lot of emotional ups and downs with that, but I've come to accept the fact that I'm the slowest trail runner in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm very proud of that at this point. So eventually along the way, I started getting into ultras. I've done a couple 50Ks. I attempted a 50 miler earlier this year, my very first 50-mile attempt out in Arizona, and it was a complete, utter disaster DNF. And on the day after, I'm walking around in a daze, pretty darn disappointed, and thinking, there's got to be a podcast about this. about being super slow, about being either DNF or DFL, or, why is there not a show about this experience? So that's what inspired me to start the show. And most critically, the thing I love about the show is that it's not about me, it's about my guests. And that's what you can expect to hear if you tune in.
I can completely relate to that because today is about you, Ben. So you do get to talk a bit more about yourself. I love the your sense of humor kind of shines through the entire production of the show, including the chats you have. Is it a bit like being out there and chatting with the other runners at the back of the pack?
Yeah, I would say so for sure. I think, but what's been really, really fun is just discovering that, when you are sort of isolated and, I would often do calculations in my head thinking like, who do I know? I want to go for a run with somebody. So who do I know that's like injured or just coming back from injury that might be just temporarily slow enough that I'm not going to annoy them to run with me? So what's been really fun is discovering that there's so many people just like me that are super slow back of the packers across the country, across the world. So that's been really, really cool to discover.
And you have found a running group along the way that caters to all speeds as well, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. The Oli Trail Runners here in Olympia is very generous in their catering to all speeds. So they do group runs a couple times a week, and they are very gracious and kind in waiting for you at the junctions. So you have to kind of get over the embarrassment of rolling up, and they've all been standing there for who knows how many minutes. But yeah. They're very generous in doing that. Check out Oli Trail Runners if you're ever in Olympia, Washington.
Fantastic. Every good group should cater to all speeds, I think. And sometimes we lose sight of the fact that the person maybe at the back is doing the most work because they don't get that break.
Yeah, exactly. I roll in and they're all looking at their watches and they're like, "Okay, let's go."
Well, speaking of rolling in or rolling out, you launched back in April. You rolled out yourself then. You've put out 20 episodes since then. How's it going? What's feedback been like?
Yeah, it is going really well. I think the most fun thing for me is that it's been a creative outlet. So just personally speaking, it's been a creative outlet that I didn't know I needed. So that's been really fun because if you do listen to the show, it's kind of filled with, like you said, some dorky sense of humor and dad jokes and things like that. But beyond that, the best thing about doing the show has been getting to know all these people and hearing their stories, because I am just totally obsessed with and endlessly fascinated by people's origin stories and background and how that plays into who they became as adults and who they became as back at the pack ultra slow runners. So that is honestly what we focus a lot on the show is who these people really are. And so that's been really fun for me, just having those conversations.
That's a pretty easy segue and perhaps even an answer to the question if you've had a favorite part so far. So maybe is there a favorite episode or something that sticks out for you?
Oh man, favorite episode. I think for me, just because I'm here in the Pacific Northwest, and I think about some of the folks that are very, very different from me in entirely different parts of the country, those have been really fun. I did an episode not too long ago with a gentleman in London that was really, really fun. So I would definitely suggest checking that out. And our next episode will also be with a UK runner. So
Nice.
it's really cool to talk to people in other countries and hear their perspectives as well.
Maybe flipping it then, it's always easy to chat about what we love, but much like a run, there are parts that we probably don't love so much, or maybe we learned the biggest lessons from. It's kind of a combo question. Is there a lesson that you've learned along the way that maybe you weren't expecting, and what's sort of been the most difficult part for you?
Yeah, 100%. In fact, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, reach out to me and I will give you some tips because I have dug myself into a bit of a hole. So this is a little message out to anyone that has recorded an interview with me. I'm so sorry that it has taken me so long to get these episodes edited and produced and released. So that has been my biggest takeaway. The only negative is just the time management piece. I got a little
Mm.
bit ahead of myself and super excited. So I've got a lot of episode interview recorded in the can, and they need to be edited and produced and released. And my my podcast does have a fairly high level of production, and it's relatively long as well. So again, it's really fun to make, but it takes a lot of time, and I didn't quite calculate or account for how much time it was really going to take.
Just curiosity then, give us a ballpark of how long your episodes are and how long it takes to produce one.
Yeah, I think they're typically about an hour long on average, when 40 plus minutes of that are the interview itself. But in terms of putting it together and editing it and producing it, man, I'm going to be embarrassed to say this. It probably takes me upwards of like 6 hours per episode. And when you're super busy and doing a lot of travel for work, that can be challenging to do on a weekly basis.
Absolutely. It's a full day's worth of work.
Yeah. Yep.
It shines through in what you do put out. So the production, at least, is coming through the other side. I love.
Oh, thank you.
Of course, I know that you must get a lot of help from producer Daisy there, which
Producer Daisy honestly is relatively lazy, doesn't do a whole lot. But producer Daisy, for those who do not know, is my faithful dog who is literally laying right next to me right now. She is with me in every interview, every episode. She is mildly obsessed with me and never leaves my side. But she deserves the producer credit for how much time she spends laying next to me, but she doesn't do a whole lot of work.
What does producer Daisy have you working towards as you get closer to 1 year next April and moving beyond?
It's a good question because, as I know, what we've done so far. We're about to release episode 21, and I know what's in the can in terms of the interviews that I already recorded. So I'm definitely dreaming about. I wouldn't necessarily want to call it season 2 because I don't want to take a long break per se, but kind of phase 2 and what that could look like. I've kind of established a cadence and a format for the show so far. Definitely open to feedback from listeners who might say, hey, I love this bit, but that bit can go, or you might want to try this. I love it when people reach out to me and recommend guests that I can bring on the show. But I think the thing that people connect with the most that I probably wouldn't change is they just like to hear the stories of other back of the Packers and what their experiences have been and where they grew up and what their childhood was like and how that plays into their athletic pursuits as adults.
I know I love anytime I see like someone right up against the cutoff. Now, the first person I think about is you. If there's any media, I'm like, I got to send this to Ben. They got to get this person.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so cool. I think the golden hour concept and experience is so much fun and so inspiring to watch. I think if you're just a pure sports fan, and I am a sports fan, and I'm very competitive myself, which doesn't show in my running, but if you challenge me to, some sort of board game or something, watch out because it's gonna get fiery. But I just love watching golden hour coverage. I think Aravaipa does an amazing job of featuring golden hour runners in the stuff that they do live coverage for. And I just love seeing that fight of getting over the line. And, it's like the ecstasy, of getting over the line just before the cutoff, but it's also just the agony of people that just miss it and DNF by seconds, right? It's like, it's just so relatable and so much, it's like endlessly fascinating to me. I just absolutely love it.
People want to follow along with your endless fascination. Where can they do that, Ben?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best way is Instagram. So you can find us on Instagram at Chasing Cutoffs. Also on Facebook, and a couple of people have reached out to me there, and I want to make that available. So on Facebook, I'm at Chasing Cutoffs Podcast. And if you really want to just send me an email, which I've gotten a few of those out of the blue too, you can send that to chasingcutoffs@gmail.com.
Fantastic. Huge thank you to Ben Mead. Huge thank you to all of you listening. Shout out to race volunteers everywhere. And until next time, I'm Adam Lee, and this is Community Trail Running.